There it goes. Hello once again, Internet. My name is Nicole, and this is my husband, Ivan, joining me today, as he always is in these book chats that we've been having. And today we are going to be talking about The Passage by Justin Cronin. And first, Ivan and I are going to talk a little bit about like the other things we've been reading in the past 2 weeks. And I think Ivan's going to pick a book. I hope Ivan's picked a book. We'll find out.
Yes, I
and
have.
then
Well, let me look it up.
and then we'll talk about The Passage. So actually, do you want to start with that? Have you picked a new book
I have picked a
for
book.
2 weeks or for a month from now?
Yeah. So it's called The Quest of Undoing by John P. Lodgson. It is supposed to be a humorous fantasy style book in like the style of Terry Pratchett, who is one of my favorite, or it has been compared to, Terry Pratchett.
Yes.
Type of thing, which is one of my, he's one of my favorite writers, and I love pretty much all of his books, except for maybe his like super late stuff or his super early stuff too. But yeah, Terry Pratchett's amazing, and I hear this one is good, and it's very highly rated, and although that doesn't often matter to me, but it seems like an interesting book, and it's not as long, so I think it would be a good one to take a break from the dark grittiness of The Passage.
I should mention, so we've been going second and fourth Sunday in every month. We've been having these, and I'm not totally certain when we're going to discuss that one because the fourth Sunday of November is the Thanksgiving weekend here in the US, and I'm going to be traveling that weekend.
And the weekend before.
So maybe we'll end up doing that. Yeah, maybe we'll end up doing that the first weekend in December, or possibly like the 28th of November, which is a Monday. We'll probably, I'll post on Twitter at some point, or like when I make the Google Live Hangout, it'll say the exact date then, but it's probably not going to be on the fourth Sunday. We're probably not going to discuss this one on the fourth Sunday in November, either the first Sunday in December or like early in the last week of November. Just a warning. But yes, humorous fantasy, which Ivan always picks, or reads a lot of, I guess.
Not really.
Always picks. Yeah, you do.
Like what?
Like Terry Pratchett. I don't know, you read a lot of things where you're like, and it was funny.
I haven't read Terry Pratchett. I mean, Terry Pratchett's been dead, unfortunately, for a couple years now.
I know that.
So I haven't really read anything by him recently.
You frequently pick books that are like humorous fantasy books.
Maybe.
You do.
Maybe.
You do.
I can't remember the last humorous fantasy book I picked, but okay. I don't think I picked a humorous fantasy book for this book club yet.
No, I don't think you have either. But
nope.
now you have.
No.
The Big Sheep was supposed to be kind of funny.
It was supposed to be, or at least that's what I like heard on the reviews, but it wasn't really that funny.
Yeah.
It was occasionally kind of funny, but it was definitely not like a comedy book.
This is true. Okay, so you want to talk a little bit?
So I failed in that, so I'm doing a legitimate humorous fantasy book this time. This one is supposed to be humorous. I know this. I did the research. Okay.
You just read like 2 Amazon reviews like 5 minutes ago, didn't you?
No, I was planning. I told you about this book like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, did you? I totally forgot.
I told you that this was going to be one of my picks.
Oh, okay. I forgot. Sorry.
I was debating between this and Weapons of Math Destruction, which is kind of like a nonfiction book about statistics, but we're doing like a nonfiction book about stuff for 2 weeks from now. So
yeah, for mine. Yep. So yes, on that note, the book we'll be discussing 2 weeks from now is Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, I think. I'll check later. But yeah, it's called Medical Apartheid, and that's a nonfiction book. So we'll be discussing that in 2 weeks. Probably, yes, that second Sunday in November. Probably at 2. Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit about, so what have you been reading in the last 2 weeks, aside from The Passage, or... The Passage was pretty long, so...
Pretty long.
Yeah.
So I'd actually I'd half finished it by... When did I visit you?
First week in October.
Right. Yeah, so I'd already have finished it by the time we started discussing Ghost Talkers. And then I didn't have that much time to read, but then I came back to it. I mostly read it in the last couple, or mostly finished it in the last couple of days. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I've been meaning to read the next book in Reria Revelations, or Reria Chronicles. That's on my list. I actually got that. A few other things, but my kind of reading queue is piling up. Because I get a book and I'm like, I'm going to read this, or, and I don't.
So in the past 2 weeks, I mostly listened to The Passage in the past 2 weeks, and then yesterday was Dewey's 24-hour readathon, which probably a lot of people who are watching this will know about, who are in the reading community, where it's basically, the idea is you take a day and you just try and read as much as you can. And I sort of participated in it, but I also had to work on my thesis, so I spent like half of the day working on my thesis and half of the day reading. But I basically listened to The Passage for 13 days of the past 2 weeks, and then yesterday I read some other stuff. But before that, like the day before that, I started Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, I think it is. That was for a different book club, and I didn't like that book, and I rage quit it about a third of the way in because I just really didn't like the setup of the story, and I was like, nope. So that's like a quantum physics time travel book, and I just thought the author did a really poor job of representing like scientists and like careers and like being an adult and like explaining quantum physics. It was just like, I was just like, this is all, I don't like any of this. So I rage quit it. And then I did finish listening to, yesterday I listened to Outliers by Max Gladwell. I don't know if you've ever read that book, Ivan. It seems like something you would like.
Is it like a stats thing?
Not exactly. So the idea he's talking about, the idea is to look at people who are like incredibly successful, who are, like outliers in the realm of success, so like Bill Gates and people like that, and talk about why they were able to achieve that level of success, and like kind of to contradict the idea of American exceptionalism, that like if you just work really hard, you'll become the next Bill Gates. And he's talking about how like if you work really hard, you'll become the next Bill Gates if you get some of these specific opportunities that Bill Gates had, which most people won't. And that's why he becomes an outlier, because he talks about, like, Bill Gates is one of the people he talks about, and he talks about how Bill Gates like lived within walking distance of the University of Washington, and at the time they had like a downtime of like 3 hours in the morning when he could use a computer for an unlimited amount of time for free. And like he did that as a teenager in high school, and so he had like tons of practice using a computer, so that by the time he went to college, he was like ahead of even his professors in terms of like using like hands-on usage of a computer. And so like it talks a lot about like specific opportunities like that a person might have had that aren't universal. So it's kind of like, I don't know, it was an interesting book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be that okay. I'm generally not big on like anecdotal account of successful person and why they're successful.
Yes, that's why I think you would like it, because it kind of is contradicting that by like looking at larger trends. So like he talks about Bill Gates, but then he extrapolates that to like all of the people who are like the founders of Microsoft and Apple, and like all of those people, and like that they're all born within like a 2-year time span, and they all had opportunities like Bill Gates did, where they happened to have a lot of access to early computers, like more access than the average person at a relatively young age, and stuff like that. So that's kind of the hypothesis of the book, is that like you need to be kind of in the right place at the right time and work really hard to succeed. And that we tend to undervalue what the right place at the right time is. And like, I think you would like it. I feel like I'm not doing a good job of selling this to you, because you're like, I don't like this concept.
Yeah.
But yes.
Maybe.
And then I read a couple of comics. I read Giant Days Volume 3, and I read Plutona, which is like a mini. It was just like a 5-issue run of a short series, and they were both good. I like them both.
Cool.
And I've been reading Wonder Woman, but I'll probably talk about that at some other point when I finish it, because it's like a long run that I'm reading.
Yeah, your start to like the 1980s Wonder Woman giant book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
my 600-page omnibus of Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I've actually been really busy this past 2 weeks, actually, with a lot of lab stuff going on. So it was kind of hectic. I didn't have a lot of time to do stuff. I didn't even I could have gotten Civ 6 and I wouldn't have been able to play it at all. So
Yeah, I'm really, for those of you who don't know, I love the Civilization series, and I have really stopping myself from buying that game because I know it'll eat my life, and I need to be responsible and not play a video game.
Yep.
For half of my day. I need to leave work and go work on my thesis some more instead of leaving work and playing a video game for the rest of my day. So.
Well, you can play it when you get here.
Yeah. Yes. Once I've defended my thesis, I'm going to visit Ivan after I defend my thesis. I defend my thesis in about a month.
Yes.
So yeah. So that's what he's referring to.
Since I'll still be in lab for most of the days.
Yes, I will have time.
You will have free time to do whatever you want, including play Civ.
Yep, that's true.
Or go catch Pokemon in the park.
Yep, or that.
Okay. Book time.
So let's talk about The Passage a little bit. I feel like, so this is a really long book. I feel like we should do like a little non-spoilery section for like, how about until like 4:40, so that's like 10 minutes.
Sure.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll see. I feel like I have a lot to talk about just because it's a really long book.
Yep.
So we can probably spend like a few minutes talking kind of non-spoilery and then talk spoilery. So, do you want to give a synopsis of the book?
Yeah.
Or should I?
I can do it. So basically, it's kind of like an apocalyptic type of book, and it covers the discovery of a virus that turns people into monsters, basically, kind of like a variation on the vampire legend. And through various means, that virus gets out, and humanity is essentially destroyed, or at least North America, since everything sets in North America, and we don't really actually know what's going on in the rest of the world throughout this book, or as I gather, throughout most of the other books either. So basically, North America is wiped out, but some people are able to band together and survive in settlements through various ways, whether either planned ahead of time by the government and executed in the last days of the viral outbreak, or people just got lucky, or various other reasons. So the book is sort of split into, I would say, two main parts. And one part, which is basically about as long as a normal book, it's about 350 pages long, is actually what happens before and in some part during the viral outbreak, where it covers the discovery of the virus, the people who are doing research into it, why the people were doing research into it, what happened to cause the outbreak, and kind of what happened immediately in the aftermath of the outbreak, and then jumps forward about 100 years to follow a settlement that was able to survive because it was rigged up to basically be constantly lit up. Since they're kind of vampires, they're hurt by...
They're very sensitive to the light. They're not immediately killed by the light, but they're very sensitive to it.
They're light sensitive, and after a few minutes of exposure, they seem to actually die from it. So
I don't know that they die from it so much as become catatonic. We never really see any of them survive after light exposure, but that's because the people come in and kill them.
Except at the end, where a bunch of them die under the sunlight.
Oh yeah, actually that's true. I didn't thought about that.
They just kind of burn up.
But that might be because of other things that are spoilery.
No, it's maybe, but I don't think so.
We can talk about that later.
Anyway, so the first part of the book is the outbreak, and the second part of the book follows a group of survivors from this city, and things are kind of starting to turn bad. Their power is starting to run out, and basically, for various reasons, they leave the little encampment and go on a quest. And
Yep.
I guess technically it's like three parts. The first part is the stuff before. The second part covers the little encampment and the characters and how it was established, and then the third part follows like a group of them on their little quest. So it's kind of like, I mean, all three parts are about the length of a book, but I don't see how any of that would have worked as an individual book. Like
No, not really. Especially not. Maybe the first part would have, but it would have
the first part could
ended
have worked as
on
an
like a
individual book.
cliffhanger. Yeah, it could have worked as its own book and just ended on a cliffhanger and like.
But then it would have been a really weird transition into the second part, because you would expect like the first book, you wouldn't expect that 100-year jump in time for the second book.
I think you could have. So in the first part of the book, so Amy is a character who exists in all three parts of the book, and you meet her pretty early on in the first part of the book. And I think you could have like had a little like prologue which talks about like Amy's because there is a little chapter in the second part of the book that talks about what Amy's been doing for the last 100 years during that time jump. And you could have had that just be like the prologue to the second book, and then just start the second book. I think that would have worked just fine. But splitting up the second and third parts would have like not made any sense. So.
Yes. But ultimately, this book is about the destruction of humanity by vampires and what happens after. And
Pretty
it's
much.
not something I would normally read, but for some reason it just seemed kind of to intrigue me when I was reading about it, so I decided to pick it up. And I was kind of glad I did, because I like this book.
Okay. I am not sure if I liked it or not. Like as I was reading it, like I finished it and it's a long book, and like as I was reading it, I was like, this is okay, this is fine. And then like I was thinking about what we were going to talk about in this, and like analyzing the individual elements of the book, I realized that I didn't like most of them. But like when I was reading to it, I was like listening to it, I was like, this is fine. It's fine. I will say I liked the first part a lot better than the second and third parts. That might just be like personal preference. So in the first part, it's like sort of like modern day current US, more or less. And we're following a couple point of view characters, but like what's up?
Oh, my mom's calling me.
Okay. I'll just keep talking and hope for the best.
No, let's go.
So our main point of view character is Agent Walgast, who's an FBI agent. And apparently Ivan's mom really wants to talk to him right now. So he's going to speak in Russian. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. But so our main character in the first part of the book is Agent Walgast, and he's an FBI agent who's kind of in charge of finding research subjects. He doesn't actually know what he's doing, but he's in charge of finding research subjects for this program that's studying the virus as like a bioterrorism agent. And he's collecting death row inmates to be research subjects, but he doesn't know what he's just collecting them, and he doesn't really know what he's doing with them.
This is completely illegal, by the way.
Yep, it's so illegal. Like
it's
like everything about the research project is super illegal and would never work and would never get congressional funding, but whatever, we're just gonna let that go. Yeah, it's actually, and like, this might be a tangent because Ivan and I are both science people, but it's actually, like, it's really difficult to do any sort of research on human subjects, and it's even more difficult to do research on people in prison populations and people with mental disabilities, because they've been like seriously exploited in the past, and so like a lot of the laws that prohibit using humans as subjects are like specifically targeted towards people, are like specifically about people who are in positions where like their consent would be marginalized, I guess, where like it's not clear if they're able to give consent without there being coercion.
Yep.
Yeah, so like it would never happen. But
so going up to a death row inmate and being like, hey, participate in this research program and we won't execute you is
you'd never be able to do
wrong
that.
on many, many levels, including super, super, super illegal. So yeah.
Yes. It is both morally wrong and like actually illegal.
But the people doing the research are not very good people.
Yeah.
They're very, very bad people.
Yes. It's
do
also
very many bad things.
Like the way they set up their research. This is why like I felt like I liked this as I was reading the book, but like now thinking back on it, I'm like there's all kinds of holes in this. Also, like the way they set up their research project, it's like the only like one person or two people who are scientists know what's going on, and then like everybody else is essentially acting blind, so they're like preparing the samples blind, which also wouldn't work like for a lot of reasons. And then it doesn't make any sense. Like it's really hard to do science secretly for a lot of reasons. Number one, because like if you're going to monetize things, like no matter what, if you're doing science, you have to get money from somewhere, either from the government or from a company. And in order to get money from those institutions, you typically have to have pretty good records of what you're doing. Or if you're going to patent something, you have to have extremely good records if you're going to patent something. So like,
I mean,
having like that kind of divide where like people actually don't know what's going on in the research project would just not, it just wouldn't really work.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is explained by so the book is set, I don't know what year it's set in. What year do you think it's set in? Sometime after 2014.
Yeah, sometime after when it's published.
Well,
basically.
I mean, it refers to like things happening in 2014. So sometime after 2014. But it's set in kind of, it almost seems like a near future, like a very near future where international relationships are breaking down. The book talks about tensions between the United States and the European continent and Asia, and basically the reason, so when they discover the virus, the scientist who initially starts work on the virus wants to work on it because there's a potential to use it for basically for gene therapy to extend the human lifespan and to improve diseases, but because he actually cannot get the research funding through normal public means, as you would, because it's kind of a crazy project, he ends up going to like a branch of government that is interested in developing the virus as a bioweapon.
Yeah, which is sort of a true thing.
Basically secret bioweapons research. So that kind of explains it. I mean, I have lots of issues with their methods. I have lots of issues with the science. But that, I don't think, is as much of a plot hole, the fact that they do it secretly. Because, yeah, they're developing a bioweapon. That's grounds for nukage by other countries.
Because I've known people who have Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense funds research in a different way than the NIH or the NSF. And they're the like second largest funder. Like they're like larger than the NSF. This is in the United States. So the NSF is the National Science Foundation, and the NIH is the National Institutes of Health. And I think the Department of Defense actually funds more than the National Science Science. What does the F stand for? Funding agency, whatever. Foundation. I probably said that right and then totally forgot. But I've known people who have like Department of Defense funding, and like they still have to, like it's still public, like they still have to maintain their
but they're
grants.
not
Like
developing a bioweapon.
I don't know, like
they may be developing they may be researching a bioweapon. There may be developing like ways. I mean, people research Ebola. I know people who had DoD funding who are researching like
anthrax,
Nipah virus, Hendra virus, like hemorrhagic fever viruses, which the book and the virus in the book is like kind of a hemorrhagic fever virus. But yeah, but they're not developing. The goal of this group is to straight up develop this virus as a weapon. The goal of the people I know who have DoD funding is to research the hell out of this virus to understand it on molecular and cellular basis so that there would be protections or vaccines or whatever in case that weapon was ever used. They're not
Or in case it just like developed as an actual like epidemic outbreak, like a natural epidemic outbreak.
Essentially, but yes, there are treaties in place about bioweapons. You're not supposed to make them. You're not gonna publish in Nature about your cool new like Nipah virus-based hemorrhagic fever lethal super soldier bioweapon serum thing.
Yes, but you.
No, just no. Like, it makes sense that it's.
There has to be some oversight. There's got to be some oversight, and like the implication is that this research project has like no oversight, which is real weird. It's real weird.
There are issues with their operation, and there's issues with how the science is being done, and there's issues with their oversight. But it definitely makes sense that this research is not public.
I mean, yes.
And
it makes sense that it's not public, but like the lack of oversight and like the division within. Anyway, we're off on a tangent. We should probably go back to talking about the book.
Back to the book. So yeah, I mean, I thought the first part was okay. I think it got kind of slow right after. Are you still there?
Yeah. So so I guess. So Agent Wellgast finds Amy, who's the character who we have throughout the book, and she's supposed to be brought in as a research subject, as opposed to all these death row inmates he's been collecting before. And like he knows something's up, but like going from like collecting death row inmates to collecting like a child, he kind of is like, I'm not okay with this, and that kind of slowly develops over the course of the first part of the story. Like that's basically what the first part of the story is about. And I actually I liked the relationship between Wellgast and Amy, and I felt like that was one of the most interesting relationships, and they were probably two of the most well-developed characters in the book. And so that's why I think I liked that part more, is because I liked the focus on them.
Yeah, I liked Peter a lot. I liked Lish. I liked some of those characters too.
So this is characters from the second part. So we'll talk about characters from the second and third part, which have the same character set.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
So basically, the second part jumps to 100 years later with this village of survivors who's been managed to keep the lights on, keep the vampires away for, better part of 100 years, except for like a few times when power failed or there was an earthquake or something. So they're completely isolationist. Like radio is forbidden for some reason. They don't have contact with the outside world. The first 10 or 20 years after they were set up, they were accepting people who would just walk in like other survivors, but they haven't really seen anyone in 30 years, basically. So.
Well, it's 10 years, right? Because Lish walked in as a child, and she's now an adult.
Lish didn't walk in. The Colonel walked in. The Colonel walked in about
Lish was a walker too. That's why the Colonel. Yeah.
Was she? No, I thought she was an orphan of. She might have been an orphan of walkers.
Her parents were walkers.
Her parents
Sorry,
that's
walkers,
right. But
so I guess
she was born
20 years. Yeah. They haven't seen
walkers
anyone
are people who just survived and walked up to the settlement and got accepted in. That's the terminology. So yeah, and we kind of come in at sort of a crisis point for the settlement because their power is failing, although nobody really knows that, and they're beginning to act all weird, and things are beginning to kind of happen for them. But the second part, I would say, the second part of the book is up until they find Amy again. And a lot of it is just development of the characters and the society and the settlement. And I thought this part was the slow part. That's the part that felt like the hump for me. And after they leave the settlement with Amy to go explore, it picked up again. The book it has such a broad scope, and it tries to do so many things that it frequently suffers from issues with pacing, and the narration changes a lot. So sometimes they do diaries. Sometimes you get kind of this, narrator who's based on the records that we have, we know this. And sometimes the narrator is completely omniscient. Nobody knows what happened, but I'll tell you, this is what happened. So I think like the narrative style jumps around, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it really doesn't. And the pacing, again, sometimes it's pretty fast. Like the first part of it is paced pretty consistently. Like sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down in the normal course of like what you would see in a book. The second part I think is paced really inconsistently, and the ending has like some of the weirdest pacing of all. Like the last like 50 pages or so, it jumps around a lot. And then so I think this is a good book. I actually think this is a pretty great book, but I think but it is like he attempted something that's really hard to pull off, and I think it's great for what it is, but it has a lot of flaws. But I still really like it. Ultimately, I guess that's.
Ultimately, I think he does some things well and some things just like very poorly. And so that's why, like, I guess there were enough things that were done well that I kept reading it, but like on reflection, there's a lot of things that I think were done really poorly. So I don't know.
Anyway, so the second part, we get a new batch of characters because everyone from the first part died 100 years ago. Well, kind of, maybe, except Amy, who at the end of the first part. So, and this isn't really much of a spoiler because Amy is the central character and she's present throughout the book, but she gets injected with the virus in the first part, which effectively renders her ageless and immortal. And able to, on some level, communicate with all the other vampire monsters. So after we get the character establishment in this new settlement with sort of like a new protagonist, well, a new set of protagonists, with the main protagonist being this guy called Peter, whose dad used to go out for weeks searching for survivors, and was this big hero, and eventually got some people killed and was removed from power, and there's some drama and issues and stuff there. And he and his band of friends or people that are loyal to him see that basically there's problems starting to happen in the settlement, and they meet Amy, and after they meet Amy, everything goes to shit, basically. So they leave / kind of escape to travel with Amy to a place where they get like a radio message from.
Yes, to figure out what's up with Amy.
To figure out what's up with Amy, and if there's any other survivors, and if there's any way to fight the virus. And at this point, we're kind of introduced to the main antagonist of the second part, or like the second and third parts as well, who is one of the original death row inmates and is a vampire.
Yes, basically.
Yeah. So I thought the second part characters were fairly well developed. A couple of them were less so, but all in all, like it's, you know, they were all unique. They had their own unique personalities and ways they acted, and for consistency. And some of them were maybe more likable, and some of them were maybe less likable, but they're there.
Yeah, I would say on the whole, the characters are my favorite part about the second and third parts of the story. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the world building or the plot, which is pretty rudimentary. But like the characters are probably my favorite part. Although I really don't like Peter, because Peter is just that like he's like the real thing that really annoys me in like fantasy books, where he's like the farm boy who's like really boring and doesn't have that much character development, and you're supposed to kind of like read your own personality onto him. Like he's developed enough that he seems like human, but he's not nearly as well developed as the other characters. And my impression is that the reader is, you know, supposed to identify with him and like see yourself in his shoes, which never works for me. Like that sort of character development never works for me.
I mean, I thought it was okay. Like, he's basically driven by his insecurities about his brother and his dad.
Right. He's basically driven by
he's sort of the second child. He's
basically driven by imposter syndrome, which is like, so is everybody on the face of the planet. Like, it's a really common issue. Like, I feel like a lot of the other characters, like, I feel like Leash had like a really interesting backstory that I think like being in her head would have been fascinating. But instead we have Peter, who's like not as interesting to me at all. So, but I think that's to some extent like personal preference, and that I don't like protagonists that are supposed to be too relatable, because like I don't want to relate to someone who's in a post-apocalyptic world with vampires. Like I don't want to live there. Why do I want to relate to that character?
Yeah, Leash was probably my favorite character of the bunch.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And I agree that most of the other characters in their group are like really well developed and generally pretty interesting.
Mouse was interesting. Theo didn't get that much.
He's also gone for like
he's gone for a long time.
Second part, yeah.
And when he comes back, he's a little traumatized. So
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't really consider him to be like a core part of the group that's going on an adventure. He's just kind of around.
Yeah, he could have been more. I mean, there's still, I guess he's there, then he's gone, and then he's there for a little bit, and then he's gone very quickly again, and then, he has his own little bit of like a side story that's kind of sprinkled in towards the end, and then, yeah.
He's not nearly as present as the other. Like, we have a pretty tight group of main characters in the second and third parts, and Theo is like an accessory character.
Yep.
I guess.
Yeah, they didn't really know what to do with him.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know.
I didn't really know what to do with him.
I wasn't like the plot. Like the second part almost doesn't have its own plot. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
The second part is really mostly sort of world building.
Yeah. And character development.
World building and character development, and then they find Amy, and then the plot moves along, which is why I found that part to be the slowest to get through. And that part over the last 2 weeks I picked up and put down again. Like I read that part really slowly, and then once I got to the third part, like yesterday afternoon or so, I like blew through that.
Okay.
Because that's when stuff starts happening again. That's when the antagonist rears his very, very, very ugly head, and that's when some of the mysteries surrounding this world start to get revealed about the vampires and how the vampires might work, and why Amy is special, and certain other characters we maybe see from the first part as well. It's when most of the action happens too.
Yeah, most of the action. There's not that much action in the second part. There's like
no. I mean, there is sprinkled through. They fight some vampires, and they fight some more vampires, and some stuff happens, especially during the end of the second part where they're like right about to find Amy, and then but it's very slow. It's mostly like character-driven drama, like internal politics of this little settlement, and it's not bad. It's just like after the first part, it slows down a lot.
It's not bad. It's just very like it feels like middle book syndrome.
Yep, definitely.
In a trilogy.
Definitely. And this kind of is essentially a trilogy, like a bunched up trilogy in one book, and it's part of a trilogy too.
Yeah.
In the first book of a trilogy. Yeah. So I like that. I like the vampires too.
Do you want to talk about like world building in general?
Sure.
Okay. I thought the world building in the first part was fine. Like you were saying, it's kind of like in your future. We don't really know how the vampires work, so I would have to read the other books to pass judgment on that, because we don't exactly know what's going on with their infection cycle and everything else. But it's like a disease-driven vampirism.
Sort of.
And then, I wasn't convinced by the world building in the second and third parts of the book. Like, it's 100 years in the future, and they're still, like, scavenging stuff from, present day settlements. And, like, they're supposed to be in a desert region of California, like a pretty dry region of California. So I would believe that some stuff would be preserved, but I don't, like, there's definitely some things that they find and are using that I don't believe would survive 100 years. They just wouldn't survive 100 years.
Maybe.
Like gas. All of the fuel they're using.
Yeah, gas...
That goes bad.
Gas goes bad, but they do kind of address that, in that they sort of find a way to filter, like, the dregs of it to make it kind of usable.
But, like,
Because you can use shit diesel to kick, and you'll kill your engine within a month, but you'll still run it.
I guess.
Like, that doesn't stretch the imagination too much. That there would be some stuff that's still scavengeable and usable.
But like they like still find shoes and clothes and like canned goods. Like true, some canned goods will last 100 years. That is true. But also like munitions rounds, like gunpowder, if it gets wet at any point, will go bad. Like you don't know that. Like I imagine the failure rate on the munitions, on the guns that they find would be a lot higher than what is portrayed.
Yeah, maybe
Like
they
the
don't
failure
use
rate of
guns
the
that much. One of the biggest stretches to believe was when Lish was using a 50 caliber mounted turret that
yes.
was strapped on a Humvee. That is like, firstly, you need training to fire one of those. And secondly, like, yeah, but because most of the munitions they get is from like a secured semi-underground bunker in a desert, in the desert region between here and Nevada, which
There would still be some kind of failure rate
yeah,
on
probably.
the stuff they find that we just don't see. And you wouldn't know if you're gonna have a round fail. Also, you might like blow up your gun. I don't know. I'm just like, there's a lot of stuff. Like they're basically surviving off of what's left over in society, and I I just had a hard time believing that all of that would still work in 100 years. But like it would still be there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I feel like their power stuff might have failed earlier, but it is portrayed a lot of the time as straight up breaking down, and that's actually the problem that the little outpost is facing, is that their power supply is just starting to get broken. So I think maybe the decay is a little too slow for plot convenience, but it's there and the author addresses it. So for me, that wasn't a very big issue.
Okay.
For the world building.
I feel like they would have had to develop other industry and like other solutions to life that they just haven't done. Like they don't seem to have developed any sort of like textile making, which I feel like you would have to do in 100 years.
Yep.
Like their entire society that we see is based around scavenging and a little bit of agriculture / herding and like defending against the virals, and like that's the entirety of their society. And I feel like they would have had to develop other things even just to replace what they have. Like they would like I feel like they would need to develop more skills than what they have. Like they have a division of labor into like whatever it is, like 10 groups. I feel
Yep.
like you need more than that.
Roughly the only people you really get to see are the engineers who keep the technology running. And that's like one guy.
Yeah. and the people who are fighting the vampires.
So people who are fighting the vampires. And you have brief mentions of the people who are like in charge of agriculture, in charge of teaching, and then there's like this third heavy labor task force that never really ever gets addressed what they do specifically. But yeah, their society is probably a little too rudimentary, but I'm okay with that if it doesn't take another 100 pages to describe. You're very big on like the post-apocalyptic world building stuff, and I know you've thought about that yourself multiple times and how societies would survive. So I can see how that could be a pet peeve for you. Not that big of a deal for me.
Okay, I guess it's a personal taste thing. I find the question of what would happen, like what happens after the end of the world. I think that's a fascinating question. We should think about it, but you're probably right, and I've probably thought about it way more than the average human being. So anyway, is there anything else you really wanted to talk about? Do you want to, I guess we can do some spoilers and like talk about the end.
Yeah, no, the only other thing I wanted to like bring up is the sort of quasi-mystical element that pervades throughout the book, and you're never really quite sure what it is. So one of the things I really liked about this is sort of how the book ties into vampire mythology in various ways, and we don't learn that much about the vampires, but we actually learn a lot in certain. It's very clear that the author draws a lot of things from a lot of places. I think he draws a lot from like the Book of Enoch. In a way, this is a parallel to that. Not completely. And he draws on existing vampire mythology. I mean, they actually play the movie Dracula in the book, which is kind of cool. Yes. And he takes things from all over the place and he kind of puts them together, but never as like a, you know, but he manages to make his vampires feel kind of unique, which I like. In part, I like his take on the fact that they're pretty much monstrous with like some level of intelligence, depending on who they were before.
I think the implication is that they're monstrous because the original 12 people who spawned most of the vampires were monstrous. And there's like you're talking about, there's like this mystical thing where there's some kind of like psychic link between the original 12 vampires and like the vampires they create. Or like the vampires, they're like strain of the virus. So the implication is that every one of these test subjects was injected with a slightly different strain of the virus. And so all the people who have the different strains, depending on which strain you were infected with, you have some kind of psychic link with the vampire that's the progenitor of that strain. And so the implication is that because these guys were death row inmates who were pretty evil, like the evil of the virus gets like way more evil.
Yeah.
And like you would be kind of a monster anyway, but because you're like psychically linked to these really terrible people, it's like even worse. Basically.
And so there were, I guess 14 people, maybe 15 injected total, or like infected total. The first person is, or Zero actually, as they call him, is a scientist who went on the original expedition to find the virus, and he got infected there. And the rest of the 13 people, / possibly 14, were infected by strains from him, modified in various ways. So the book's primary antagonist is number 1 of the 12. So Amy is the 13th. She's the last person. And she manages to keep her sanity and humanity intact. Essentially, she doesn't transform into a monster. But the 12 people before her were all death row inmates, and they were infected, and they transformed. And they each sort of seem to command vampires that kind of spread from them, like the vampire, the people they bit, and the people and and the vampires that he created, the vampires that they created, etc. So it's kind of like a family controlled by one of the 12 vampires. And the antagonist, the first one, Babcock, is the antagonist of this book, because he ultimately, after escaping from the research facility, returned to California and kind of commands all the vampires in that area. And
actually, Nevada.
That's kind of interesting.
Close enough. He's in Nevada. He's in Nevada.
Oh, yeah. He's in Nevada.
But close enough.
Because he commands all the vampires in that sort of area are pretty much under his command. So, yeah. So, but Babcock was like not a good guy. He was, in life he was sort of developmentally delayed, and he murdered his mom and was kind of crazy.
He was a psychopath, and it's kind of implied he probably would have been a serial killer if.
Probably. He had the makings of a serial killer, but he, murdered his mom and then he got caught. He was abused, was maybe maybe mentally retarded, but yeah. So he was not a good person. Interestingly, one of the people that gets injected, one of the 12 death row inmates, is actually innocent. We don't get. We meet his character in the beginning. We actually spend a lot of time with that character, and I'm guessing he probably shows up again, and he becomes one of these 12 master vampires. So he probably shows up again in one of the later books. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see how, what he became.
What
with
his
the
vampires
virus.
are like, yeah.
Because when he first escapes, he's kind of killer. Like he does go and undergo the monstrous transformation. And he does, you know, break out and start killing people, but maybe he's different in some way from the other 12.
Also, like, so we meet characters at the end who are from like a Republic of Texas that's been established more or less where Texas was, and he's from Texas. Like he was in Texas. Like the final
Okay,
vampire.
yeah, he is.
So, like, you know, like something's like I feel like something has to be like his vampires are probably different and maybe like not as aggressive or something because
Maybe.
they're in his area. Like the people we meet at the end who are survivors are from the area where he's from.
Yep. And that may be like the most successful settlement, other than like the settlements you learn are actually cultivated by the vampires.
Yeah. The vampires some of the vampires, at least the one we meet as the major antagonist, like at some point realized that he was going to kill off all the humans in his area and then started like collecting them and not killing them all immediately.
Yes, he started breeding humans for food.
Yes.
So I thought that was pretty cool too. And then the mystery of like the first vampire, Zero. What was him? Timothy Fanning, I think, was the doctor's name.
Yeah.
So, and what he kind of has to do with everything, because he can. We learn in the book through like the brief point of view we get of vampire number 1, Babcock, that Zero can communicate with all of them and can kind of give him orders. So we don't know what his deal is or what he's trying to do.
Yes. So do you plan on continuing on with the series?
Yes, but not right away because it's...
You need a break?
Yeah. It's a long read, but I think it's great. Like, I think
I'll let you read it and tell me about it. I don't think I'll probably continue on.
Okay. That makes sense.
But you can tell me about it. You can tell me what happens with Carter's vampires and tell me if they're interesting.
I mean, I think in some senses you don't have to read the entire series. I think this book alone is kind of a fair, complete story.
Yeah, I
with
mean,
room to go, but it's not like it ends on a cliffhanger.
No.
Well, okay,
it
no,
definitely...
actually, it ends directly on a cliffhanger. Sorry.
No. Oh, yeah, you're right. It does.
It
Sorry.
does.
There's like the last chapter that's totally a cliffhanger.
The postscript, the epilogue is totally a cliffhanger. But without that, it doesn't really end on a cliffhanger. It just ends on like a nebulous what will happen next.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. I forgot all about that last thing. There's like a last chapter that's like 2 pages and it's totally a cliffhanger. You're right.
Yep. So maybe we can go see the movie when it comes out.
Oh, is there a movie?
I think it's been optioned, but everything is optioned, so I don't know if it's ever going to become a movie.
Gotcha. Yeah, I suppose.
Okay.
All right, so we've talked about this a lot. So I think, because, I mean, it was long. There's a lot to talk about.
What did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you make it through it? Did you make it more than 10% of the way in? Let us know.
Did you stall out in part 2 and never finish the book?
Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see you in 2 weeks to talk about medical apartheid, which is like change of directions completely. And that's all.
Bye.